So I've been watching Solar Opposites these last days, and you might think it looks similar to Rick and Morty. That's because one of the creators of Rick and Morty is behind this new series. Well, he's now removed from both Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites due to abuse allegations. But what I want to talk about here today is how this absurd sci-fi comedy has many details that I absolutely love. Like terrorist teacher in every episode, some of them already on my wishlist. But what I'm here to discuss is one of these details of the show. It's subplots. Let me start with probably the best subplot in the series, the wall. Small disclaimer here, this video contains some spoilers for Solar Opposite subplots. So for those unfamiliar with the show, let me summarize this subplot very quickly. The wall is a real wall in the bedroom of two teenage aliens, which they have turned into a giant terrarium with interconnected levels to imprison people they is wrong because they dislike them. Initially it's a secondary plot used for comic relief in the earlier seasons. But as we go on the show, the society they've created inside the wall develops its own economy, which leads to a power struggle where the Duke takes control and a new faction within the wall forms the Wawinian Church, worshipping the alien that imprisoned them. A resistance emerges, sparking a large-scale rebellion that results in chaos, flooding of the lower levels, and numerous deaths. During the rebellion, Tim and Sherry, its leaders, develop a romantic relationship. After defeating the Duke, they discover an escape route, but betrayal ensues as Tim stabs and throws her through the exit. Sherry survives pregnant and during the harsh environment, eventually surviving thanks to the Duke. Tim lies to those inside the wall and implements his own tyranny. In a crime subplot, a detective uncovers that a murderer is operating under Tim's watch, but takes the decision of hiding this discovery. But when eventually Sherry returns to the wall with her child, she allies with the detective to overthrow Tim, who is now weakened and poisoned. Leadership of the wall falls to a representative government just created by Sherry, but the electricity is cut and they are forced to do a suicidal mission to the flooded levels that are infested with mosquitoes. The detective sacrifices himself to save the other from a mosquito attack. When Sherry manages to return into the city, she discovers her child has been kidnapped by the church, which now claims the child is a gift from the alien and establishes a theocratic regime. The wall splits into factions, the religion and the secular, living in artificial peace. Sherry, living in the secular side, still wants to rescue her child, now held captive by the religious side, leading to a war between the two factions separated by a wall within the wall. Yes, all this happens in the background of a show that isn't even about any of this. Whether this subplot is better than the main series is entirely subjective, and I'm not too interested in that debate right now. What is interesting is that the wall subplot evolves from a comedic terrarium into a dystopian epic with rebellion, romance and theocratic rule, all within a bedroom wall. Regardless of comparison with the show's main events, it creates a fascinating story that keeps you hooked, wanting to know what happens next. In this case, it's not even about the characters. I found Tim an interesting character, but once he's gone, the other characters don't interest me much. Except for the occasional standout, but the rest are just not interesting. But I'm still hooked, thanks to the plot and its sheer epicness. This is just a part of what subplots do in this show. It has another subplot that for me is even more interesting, the SilverCops. Imagine a Green Lantern spin-off with more police, corruption, and ethical dilemmas. Styled like an 80s show, that's essentially what the Silver could be if they had their own series. This plot, as far as I am in the show, has barely been explored, appearing in just 2 episodes so far. Yet it captivated me enough to start watching the actual 80s show it's based on. The subplot follows a neighbor of the aliens, whom the aliens, for unrelated reasons, throw into the space. Eventually, the human is imprisoned by space cops who are blatant Green Lantern ripoff. They recruit him as another cop and take him on a drug raid. But it turns out to be a trap to frame him for the murder of another cop they want to kill. That's pretty much the entire storyline, corrupt space cops. And it doesn't go beyond that as far as I am. If we look at Solar Opposite's predecessor, Rick and Morty, we find examples of parallel subplots, the most notable being the Citadel of Ricks. Whether it's overrated or not, doesn't matter. The Citadel of Ricks managed to grab everyone's attention without exception. A political power struggle hiding behind one of the show's usual wacky adventures. I won't go into much detail since you are probably familiar with it, What interested me is how these subplots, despite having less screen time, manage to stand out and captivate the audience. And I'm interested in how these plots are created, how it's decided that a story is intriguing enough to be told, yet perhaps not enough to warrant its own series. I think this approach works well for them. Let me explain. All of these are cool and interesting ideas, but it's not clear to what extent they could function as independent series, rather than as a dramatic relief in a comedy series. If you have never heard the term of dramatic relief, it's okay, I just made it up. If you have heard it, then someone must have thought it before me. The point is, while most of shows and movies tend to include comedic relief, even those that are primarily comedic still need a source of comedic relief for the moments when the series plot grow more serious. Some manage this organically without disrupting the tone of the episode, while others struggle a bit. But then there's another type of series that's become quite popular recently, adult comedy animation, that repeatedly use techniques like breaking the fourth wall or mocking the lack of continuity in the series. These kinds of comedies fully commit to their essence, comedy. They doesn't get too deep in serious or dramatic storylines unless it's something the creators feel the series genuinely needs at the moment. This is refreshing because it spares us from emotional fluff and gets us straight to the jokes and the action we came for. However, while the continuity and drama of the main plots can influence a series' long-term development, opening threads that might frustrate fans if left unresolved, this series often choose to create inconsequential serious plots. They present secondary storylines with secondary characters, granting the freedom to tell any story they want without being tied to continuity, choosing to provide it only when it suits them. And in this type of shows, it makes a lot of sense for the writers to decide to put these subplots in front of another random episode, because the audience needs to have some type of drama, something to be hooked into, to make you wanting more. Yeah, the simple funny stories are enough for you to watch for hours, but not for months and seasons. If you start something, even something you like a lot, you will end up letting it go at some point, unless they manage to hook you before. Writers use this to explain some epicity at the same time to make us being hooked. These subplots used as dramatic relief let us explore different worlds and stories. Since they are subplots, the time for characters and plot development is limited. Yet, somehow, that doesn't seem to hurt them. These stories manage to overcome that barrier, which I find remarkable. Part of what makes these plots feel substantiable is that the world doesn't stop existing when we are not looking. If we don't hear about the Citadel for a season, it doesn't mean it disappeared. It means that when we return a season later, we see that Evil Morty has been climbing the power structure, eventually running for president. If we don't see Cherry for a few episodes, it doesn't mean she's been idle. It means her pregnancy has progressed and she's about to have a baby. This temporal limitation adds dynamism that wouldn't exist if these stories were stretched out into full series, while also making them feel alive. Telling the intricacies of these characters without being tied to time is a significant advantage. They can dedicate a scene or a throwaway line in some episodes, then devote an entire episode later to develop into this subplot. But then, wouldn't these plots be enough for a standalone series? Why they are not? This is a question we might ponder, as certain subplots often leave us fantasizing about seeing more, about enjoying that storyline in a dedicated show. Yet, I don't think it will work, at least not for all of them. Let me try to explain why. Some subplots, like the SilverCops, could probably work. If developed, it could turn into a series about the space cops aching to the Green Lanterns, solving various cases. A concept that's already been explored. However, unlike Green Lantern series, more emphasis could be placed on the policing aspects, corruption, and the fighting against drugs. In short, A police series, but exploring the new boundaries that setting it in a space with superpowers provides. It wouldn't be a superhero series about cops, but a cop series with superpowers. Something like what I hope the Lantern series will be when it comes out. If you noticed, I talk about developing the idea, not the plot. And this is because the plot itself is short and serves its purpose, a single episode in a comedy series. But while this dynamism works well for it, if it were expanded into a full series, this plot could only serve as a pilot, from which an entire series could be built by expanding the characters and storylines. This might lose a bit of dynamism, but I believe it could still work. There is a different case with The Wall or the Citadel. It's another matter. Plots like The Wall and the Citadel work because they are in the background, letting us focus on significant events without needing the current temporal narrative or fixed characters. They work because, as I mentioned earlier, The Wall might only appear for a few minutes in some episodes, and not at all in others. Yet, the plot still progresses even when we don't see it. This allows the focus to remain solely on interesting things. If this were a standalone series, you couldn't have episodes that are just 4 minutes long, or others that are 20 minutes long, and then 3 episodes where the plot is not evolving. You also couldn't include so many time skips without confusing the audience and disrupting the series rhythm. For all these reasons, series that solely focus on these stories wouldn't be as compelling. At least not on their own. On top of that, these plots, even though they are disconnected from the protagonist of the series most of the time, require the protagonist to exist in the first place. The Citadel makes no sense if you don't know who Rick and Morty are, and The Wall doesn't make sense without understanding why the people have shrunk and live in a wall. The only way they could work is as spin-offs of the main series, but they would still need to reference it occasionally to remain relevant. Subplots like this remind us of richness hiding in TV storytelling. They don't just fill time, they add depth, surprise, and sometimes outshine the main plot. I'm going back to watch Solar Opposites to see what absurd stories it comes up with next, and then maybe some Rick and Morty. And you, if you want more videos like this, subscribe, because I post a bit of everything here, so stay tuned.